Sixth day. The next morning, the age warden of the tower, after examining the work performed by the wedding guests in the laboratory and finding it satisfactory, caused ladders, ropes, and large wings to be brought forth and addressed the assembled artists thus: My dear sons, one of these three things must each of you this day constantly bear about with him. Lots were cast, and to CRC, much to his chagrin, fell a heavy ladder. Those who secured wings had them fastened to their backs so cunningly that it was impossible to detect that they were artificial. The age warden then locked the artists in the tower room of the tower, but in a short time a round hole was uncovered in the ceiling, and Virgo Luciferia invited all to ascend. Those with wings flew at once through the opening. Those with ropes had many difficulties, while CRC with his ladder made reasonable speed. On the second floor, the wedding guests, musicians, and Virgo Luciferia gathered about a fountain-like contrivance containing the bodies of the 6 royal persons. Virgo Luciferia then placed the Moor's head in a kettle-like receptacle in the upper part of the fountain and poured upon it the substances prepared on the previous day in the laboratory. The virgins placed lamps beneath. These substances, when they boiled, passed out through holes in the sides of the kettle, and falling upon the bodies in the fountain below, dissolved them. The 6 royal bodies having been reduced thus to a liquid state, a tap was opened in the lower end of the fountain, and the fluid drained into the immense golden globe, which, when filled, was a great weight. All but the wedding guests then retired, and shortly a hole in the ceiling opened as before, and the guests ascended pell-mell to the 3rd floor. Here the globe was suspended by a strong chain. The walls of the apartment were of glass, and mirrors were so arranged that the sun's rays were concentrated upon the central globe, thus causing it to become very hot. Later, the sun's rays were deflected and the globe permitted to cool, after which it was cut open with a diamond, revealing a beautiful white egg. Carrying this with her, Virgo Luciferia departed. The guests, having ascended through another trap door, found themselves upon the 4th floor, where stood a square kettle filled with silver sand, warmed by a gentle fire. The great white egg was placed upon the warm sand to mature. In a short time it cracked, and there emerged an ugly, ill-tempered bird, which was fed with the blood of the beheaded royal persons diluted with prepared water. At each feeding, its feathers changed color. From black they turned to white, and at last they became varicolored, the disposition of the bird improving the while. Dinner was then served, after which Virgo Luciferia departed with the bird. The guests ascended with ropes, ladders, and wings to the 5th floor, when a bath colored with fine white powder had been prepared for the bird, which enjoyed bathing in it until the lamps placed beneath the bath caused the water to become uncomfortably warm. When the heat had removed all the bird's feathers, it was taken out, but the fire continued until nothing remained in the bath save a sediment in the form of a blue stone. This was later pounded up and made into a pigment. With this, all of the bird, except the head, was painted. The guests thereupon ascended to the 6th floor, where stood a small altar resembling that in the king's throne room. The bird drank from the little fountain and was fed with the blood of the white serpent which crawled through the openings in the skull. The sphere by the altar revolved continuously. The watch struck 1, 2, and then 3, at which time the bird, laying its neck upon the book, suffered itself to be decapitated. Its body was burned to ashes, which were placed in a box of cypress wood. Virgo Luciferia told CRC and the 3 of his comrades that they were lazy and sluggish laborers and would therefore be excluded from the 7th room. Musicians were sent for, who, with cornets, were to blow the 4 in ridicule from the chamber. CRC and his 3 companions were disheartened until the musicians told them to be of good cheer and led them up a winding stair to the 8th floor of the tower directly beneath the roof. Here the old warden, standing upon a little round furnace, welcomed them and congratulated them upon being chosen by Virgo Luciferia for this greater work. Virgo Luciferia then entered, and after laughing at the perplexity of her guests, emptied the ashes of the bird into another vessel, filling the cypress box with useless matter. She thereupon returned to the 7th floor, presumably to mislead those assembled there by setting them to work upon the false ashes in the box. CRC and his 3 friends were set to work moistening the bird's ashes with specially prepared water until the mixture became a dough-like consistency, after which it was heated and molded into 2 miniature forms. Later, these were opened, disclosing 2 bright and almost transparent human images about 4 inches high, homonuclea, 1 male and 1 female. These tiny forms were laid upon satin cushions and fed drop by drop with the blood of the bird until they grew to normal size and of great beauty. Though the bodies had the consistency of flesh, they showed no signs of life, for the soul was not in them. The bodies were next surrounded with torches and their faces covered with silk. Virgo Luciferia then appeared, bearing 2 curious white garments. The virgins also entered, among them 6 bearing great trumpets. A trumpet was placed upon the mouth of one of the 2 figures, and CRC saw a tiny hole open in the dome of the tower and a ray of light descend through the tube of the trumpet and enter the body. This process was repeated 3 times on each body. The 2 newly ensouled forms were then removed upon a traveling couch. In about a half hour, the young king and queen awakened, and Virgo Luciferia presented them with the white garments. These they donned, and the king in his own person most graciously returned thanks to CRC and his companions, after which the royal persons departed upon a ship. CRC and his 3 privileged friends then rejoiced, the other artists making no mention of that which they had seen. Later, the entire party were assigned handsome chambers where they rested till morning. The 7th day. In the morning, Virgo Luciferia announced that each of the wedding guests had become a Knight of the Golden Stone. The Age Warden then presented each man with a gold medal bearing on one side the inscription, "Are not me," and on the other, "Tem na fa." No, Tem na f. The entire company returned in 12 ships to the king's palace. The flags on the vessels bore the signs of the zodiac, and CRC sat under that of Libra. As they entered the lake, many ships met them, and the king and queen, together with their lords, ladies, and virgins, rode forth on the golden barge to greet the returning guests. Atlas then made a short oration in the king's behalf, also asking for the royal presence. In reply, the Age Warden delivered to Cupid, who hovered about their royal pair, a small, curious-shaped casket. CRC and the old lord, each bearing a snow white ensign with a red cross on it, rode in the carriage with the king. At the first gate stood the porter with blue clothes, who, upon seeing CRC, begged him to intercede with the king to release him from the post of servitude. The king replied that the porter was a famous astrologer who was forced to keep the gate as a punishment for the crime of having gazed upon Lady Venus reposing upon her couch. The king further declared that the porter could be released only when another was found who had committed the same crime. Upon hearing this, CRC's heart sank, for he realized himself to be the culprit, but he remained silent at the time. The newly created Knights of the Golden Stone were obliged to subscribe to 5 articles drawn up by His Royal Highness. 1. That they would ascribe their order only to God and his handmaid, nature. 2. That they should abominate all uncleanliness and vice. 3. That they should always be ready to assist the worthy and needy. 4. That they should not use their knowledge and power for the attainment of worldly dignity. 5. That they should not desire to live longer than God had decreed. They were then duly installed as knights, which ceremony was ratified in a little chapel where CRC hung up his golden fleece and his hat for an eternal memorial, and here he inscribed the following: Summa Sentia Nihil Scire, Fer Christianus Rosencreutz, Equis Auri Lapidus, Anno 1459. After the ceremony, CRC admitted that he was the one who had beheld Venus and consequently must become the porter of the gate. The king embraced him fondly, and he was assigned to a great room containing 3 beds, one for himself, one for the aged lord of the tower, and the third for old Atlas. The chemical marriage here comes to an abrupt end, leaving the impression that CRC was to assume his duties as porter on the following morning. The book ends in the middle of a sentence with a note in italics, presumably by the editor. Under the symbolism of the alchemical marriage, medieval philosophers concealed the secret system of spiritual culture whereby they hoped to coordinate the disjecta membra of both the human and social organisms. Society, they maintained, was a threefold structure and had its analogy in the triune constitution of man. For as man consists of spirit, mind, and body, so society is made up of the church, the state, and the populace. The bigotry of the church, the tyranny of the state, and the fury of the mob are the three murderous agencies of society which seek to destroy truth, as recounted in the Masonic legend of Hiram Abiff. The first 6 days of the chemical marriage set forth the processes of philosophical creation through which every organism must pass. The three kings are the threefold spirit of man and their consorts, the corresponding vehicles of their expression in the lower world. The executioner is the mind, the higher part of which, symbolized by the head, is necessary to the achievement of the philosophical labor. Thus, the parts of man, by the alchemists, symbolized as planets and elements, when blended together according to a certain divine formula, result in the creation of two philosophic babes, which, fed from the blood of the alchemical bird, became rulers of the world. From an ethical standpoint, the young king and queen, resurrected at the summit of the tower and ensouled by divine life, represent the forces of intelligence and love which must ultimately guide society. Intelligence and love are the two great ethical luminaries of the world and correspond to enlightened spirit and regenerated body. The bridegroom is reality, and the bride the regenerated being who attains perfection by becoming one with reality through a cosmic marriage wherein the mortal parts attains immortality by being united with his own immortal source. In the Hermetic marriage, divine and human consciousness are united in holy wedlock, and he in whom the sacred ceremony takes place is designated as Knight of the Golden Stone. He thereby becomes a divine philosophic diamond composed of the quintessence of his own sevenfold constitution. Such is the true interpretation of the mystical process of becoming a bride of the Lamb. The Lamb of God is signified by the golden fleece that Jason was forced to win before he could assume his kingship. The flying lion is illumined will, an absolute prerequisite to the achievement of the great work. The episode of weighing the souls of men has its parallel in the ceremony described in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The walled city entered by CRC represents the sanctuary of wisdom wherein dwell the real rules of the world, the initiated philosophers. Like the ancient mysteries after which it was patterned, the Order of the Rose Cross possessed a secret ritual which was lived by the candidate for a prescribed number of years before he was eligible to the inner degrees of society. The various floors of the Tower of Olympus represent the orbits of the planets. The ascent of philosophers from one floor to another also parallels certain rituals of the Eleusinian mysteries and the rites of Mithras, wherein the candidate ascended the 7 rungs of a ladder or climbed the 7 steps of a pyramid in order to signify release from the influences of the planetary governors. Man becomes master of the 7 spheres only when he transmutes the impulses received from them. He who masters the 7 worlds and is reunited with the divine source of his own nature consummates the Hermetic marriage. Chapter 8, Bacon, Shakespeare, and the Rosicrucians.